Aurora, Leigh, Book 3, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Quo. Today thou girdest up thy loins thyself and goest where thou wouldest, presently others shall gird thee, Quo. Said the Lord, Quo. To go where thou wouldst not, Quo. He spoke to Peter thus, to signify the death which he should die when crucified head downward. If he spoke to Peter then, he speaks to us the same. The word suits many different martyrdoms, and signifies a multiform of death, although we scarcely die apostles, and have mislaid the keys of heaven and earth. For 'tis not in mere death that men die most, and, after our first girding of the loins in youth's fine linen and fair broidery, to run uphill and meet the rising sun, we are apt to sit tired, patient as a fool, while others gird us with the violent bands of social figments, feints, and formalisms, reversing our straight nature, lifting up our base needs, keeping down our lofty thoughts, head downward on the cross sticks of the world. Yet he can pluck us from that shameful cross. God, set our feet low and our forehead high, and show us how a man was made to walk. Leave the lamp, Susan, and go up to bed. The room does very well. I have to write beyond the stroke of midnight. Get away. Your steps, forever buzzing in the room, tease me like gnats. Ah, letters. Throw them down at once, as I must have them, to be sure, whether I bid you never bring me such at such an hour, or bid you. No excuse. You choose to bring them, as I choose perhaps to throw them in the fire. Now get to bed, and dream, if possible. I am not cross. Why, what a petty thing I grow, a mere woman, a mere flaccid nerve, a kerchief left out all night in the rain, turned soft so, overtasked and overstrained and overlived in this close London life. And yet I should be stronger. Never burn your letters, poor Aurora. For they stare with red seals from the table, saying each, Quo. Here's something that you know not. Quo. Out, alas, 'tis scarcely that the world's more good and wise, or even straighter and more consequent since yesterday at this time yet, again, if but one angel spoke from Aurora I should be very sorry not to hear, so open all the letters. Let me read. Blanche Ort, the writer in the Quo. Ladies' fan, Quo. Requests my judgment on that, afterwards. Kate Ward desires the model of my cloak, and signs and Quo. Elisha to you. Quo. Pringle Sharp presents his work on and Quo. Social conduct, Quo. Craves a little money for his pressing debts. From me, who scarce have money for my needs. Art's fiery chariot which we journey in, being apt to singe our singing robes to holes, although you ask me for my cloak, Kate Ward. Here's Rudgley knows it, editor and scribe. He's in Quo. Forced to marry where his heart is not, because the purse lacks where he lost his heart. Quo. Ah, lost it because no one picked it up. That's really loss, and passable impudence. My critic Hammond flatters prettily, and wants another volume like the last. My critic Belfire wants another book entirely different, which will sell and live. A striking book, yet not a startling book. The public blames originalities. You must not pump spring water unawares upon a gracious public full of nerves. Good things, not subtle, new yet orthodox, as easy reading as the dog-eared page that's fingered by said public 50 years, since first taught spelling by its grandmother, and yet a revelation in some sort. That's hard, my critic Belfire. So what next? My critic Stokes objects to abstract thoughts. Quo. Call a man John, a woman Joan, Quo. Says he, Quo. And do not prate so of humanities, Quo. Whereat I call my critic simply, Stokes. My critic Jobson recommends more mirth because a cheerful genius suits the times, and all true poets laugh unquenchably like Shakespeare and the gods. That's very hard. The gods may laugh, and Shakespeare. Dante smiled with such a needy heart on two pale lips, we cry and quo. Be brother, Dante. Quo. Poems are men, if true poems, and who dares exclaim at any man's door, quo. Here, 'tis understood the thunder fell last week and killed a wife and scared a sickly husband. What of that? Get up, be merry, shout and clap your hands, because a cheerful genius suits the times and quo. None says so to the man, and why indeed should any to the poem? A ninth seal. The apocalypse is drawing to a close. Hectares, this from Vincent Carrington, quo. Dear friend, I want good counsel. Will you lend me wings to raise me to the subject, in a sketch I'll bring tomorrow, may I? At 11? A poet's only born to turn to use, so save you. For the world. And Carrington. Quo. Quo. Writ after. Have you heard of Leigh, beyond what's said of him in newspapers, his philosopheries there, his speeches here, his pamphlets, pleas, and statements, everywhere? He dropped me long ago, but no one drops a golden apple, though indeed one day you hinted that, but jested. Well, at least you know Lord Howe who sees him. Whom he sees and you see, and I hate to see, for Howe stands high upon the brink of theories, observes the swimmers and cries very fine, but keeps strilling and equally, unlike that gallant breaster, Romney. Strange it is, such sudden madness seizing a young man to make earth over again, while I'm content to make the pictures. Let me bring the sketch. A tiptoe Donny, overbold and hot, both arms aflame to meet her wishing Jove halfway, and burn him faster down. The face and breasts upturned and straining, the loose locks all glowing with the anticipated gold. Or here's another on the self-same theme. She lies here flat upon her prison floor, the long hair swathed about her to the heel like wet seaweed. You dimly see her through the glittering haze of that prodigious rain, half blotted out of nature by a love as heavy as fate. I'll bring you either sketch. I think, myself, the second indicates more passion. Quo. Surely. Self is put away, and come with abdication. She is Jove, and no more denigrator thus. Perhaps the painter symbolizes unaware two states of the recipient artist's soul, one, forward, personal, wanting reverence, because aspiring only. We'll be calm, and know that, when indeed our Joves come down, we all turn stiller than we have ever been. Kind Vincent Carrington. I'll let him come. He talks of Florence, and may say a word of something as it chanced 7 years ago, a hedgehog in the path, or a lame bird, in those green country walks, in that good time when certainly I was so miserable. I seem to have missed a blessing ever since. The music soars within the little lark, and the lark soars. It is not thus with men. We do not make our places with our strains, content, while they rise, to remain behind alone on earth instead of so in heaven. No matter. I bear on my broken tale. When Leigh and I had parted thus, I took a chamber up 3 flights of stairs not far from being as steep as some larks climb, and there, in a certain house in Kensington, 3 years I lived and worked. Get leave to work in this world, 'tis the best you get at all. For God, in cursing, gives us better gifts than men in benediction. God says, quo. Sweat for foreheads, quo. Men say and quo. Crowns, quo. And so we are crowned, gashed by some tormenting circle of steel which snaps with a secret spring. Get work, get work. Be sure 'tis better than what you work to get. Serene and unafraid of solitude, I worked the short days out, and watched the sun on lurid morns or monstrous afternoons like some druidic idol's fiery brass with fixed unflickering outline of dead heat, from which the blood of wretches pent inside seems oozing forth to incarnate in the air, push out through fog with his dilated disk, and startle the slant roofs and chimney pots with splashes of fierce color. Or I saw fog only, the great tawny weltering fog, involve the passive city, strangle it alive, and draw it off into the void, spires, bridges, streets, and squares, as if a sponge had wiped out London, or as noon and night had clapped together and utterly struck out the intermediate time, undoing themselves in the act. Your city poets see such things not despicable. Mountains of the south, when drunk and mad with elemental wines they rend the seamless mist and stand up bare, make fewer singers, haply. No one sings, descending Sinai, on Parnassus Mount you take a mule to climb and not amuse except in fable and figure, forests chant their anthems to themselves, and leave you dumb. But sit in London at the day's decline, and view the city perish in the mist like Pharaoh's armaments in the deep Red Sea, the chariots, horsemen, footmen, all the host, soaked down and choked to silence then, surprised by a sudden sense of vision and of tune, you feel as conquerors though you did not fight, and you and Israel's other singing girls, Miriam with them, sing the song you choose. I worked with patience, which means almost power. I did some excellent things indifferently, some bad things excellently. Both were praised, the latter loudest. And by such a time that I myself had set them down as sins scarce worth the price of sackcloth, week by week arrived some letter through the sedulous post, like these I've read, and yet dissimilar, with pretty maiden seals, initials twined of lilies, or a heart marked Emily, convicting Emily of being all heart, or rarer tokens from young bachelors, who wrote from college with the same goose quill, suppose, they had just been plucked of, and a snatch from Horace, quo. Collegius Juvat, quo. Set upon the first page. Many a letter, signed or unsigned, showing the writers at 18 had lived too long, although a muse should help their dawn by holding candles, compliments to smile or sigh at. Such could pass with me no more than coins from Moscow circulate at Paris. Would 10 rubles buy a tag of ribbon on the boulevard, worth a sou? I smiled that all this youth should love me, sighed that such a love could scarcely raise them up to love what was more worthy than myself, then sighed again, less generously, to think the very love they lavished so proved me inferior. The strong loved me not, and he, my cousin Romney, did not write. I felt the silent finger of his scorn prick every bubble of my frivolous fame as my breath blew it, and resolve it back to the air it came from. Oh, I justified the measure he had taken of my height, the thing was plain he was not wrong a line. I played at art, made thus with a toy sword, amused the lads and maidens. Came a sigh deep, hoarse with resolution, I would work to better ends, or play in earnest. Quo. Heavens, I think I should be almost popular if this went on. Quo. I ripped my verses up, and found no blood upon the rapier's point. The heart in them was just an embryo's heart which never yet had beat, that it should die. Just gasps of make-believe galvanic life. Mere tones, unorganized to any tune. And yet I felt it in me where it burned, like those hot fire seeds of creation held in Jove's clenched palm before the worlds were sown, but I was not Juno even. My hand was shut in weak convulsion, woman's ill, and when I yearned to loose a finger lo, the nerve revolted. 'Tis the same even now, this hand may never, haply, open large, before the spark is quenched, or the palm charred, to prove the power not else than by the pain. It burned. It burns, my whole life burned with it, and light, not sunlight and not torchlight, flashed my steps out through the slow and difficult road. I had grown distrustful of 2 forward springs, the season's books and drear significance of morals, dropping round me. Lively books? The ash has livelier verdure than the yew, and yet the yew's green longer, and alone found worthy of the holy Christmas time. We'll plant more yews if possible, albeit we plant the graveyards with them. Day and night I worked my rhythmic thought, and furrowed up both watch and slumber with long lines of life which did not suit their season. The rose fell from either cheek, my eyes glowed luminous through orbits of blue shadow, and my pulse would shudder along the purple vined wrist like a shot bird. Youth's stern, set face to face with youth's ideal, and when people came and said in quo, "You work too much, you are looking ill," ampersand quo, I smiled for pity of them who pitied me, and thought I should be better soon perhaps for those ill looks. Observant quo. I, ampersand quo, means in youth just I, the conscious and eternal soul with all its ends, and not the outside life, the parcel man, the doublet of the flesh, the so much liver, lung, integument, which make the sum of and quo. I and quo. Hereafter when world talkers talk of doing well or ill, I prosper if I gain a step, although a nail then pierced my foot, although my brain embracing any truth froze paralyzed, I prosper, I but change my instrument. I break the spade off, digging deep for gold, and catch the mattock up. I worked on, through all the bristling fence of nights and days which hedges time in from the eternities. I struggled, never stopped to note the stakes which hurt me in my course. The midnight oil would stink sometimes. There came some vulgar needs, I had to live that therefore I might work, and, being but poor, I was constrained, for life, to work with one hand for the booksellers while working with the other for myself and art. You swim with feet as well as hands, or make small way. I apprehended this. In England no one lives by verse that lives. And, apprehending, I resolved by prose to make a space to sphere my living verse. I wrote for cyclopedias, magazines, and weekly papers, holding up my name to keep it from the mud. I learned the use of the editorial and quo. We and quo. In a review as courtly ladies the fine trick of trains, and swept it grandly through the open doors as if one could not pass through doors at all save so encumbered. I wrote tales beside, carved many an article on cherry stones to suit light readers, something in the lines revealing, it was said, the mallet hand, but that, I'll never vouch for. What you do for bread will taste of common grain, not grapes, although you have a vineyard in Champagne. Much less in Nephila as mine was, peradventure. Having breath for just so many days, just breathing room for body and verse, I stood up straight and worked my veritable work. And as the soul which grows within a child makes the child grow, or as the fiery sap, the touch from God, careering through a tree, dilates the bark and roughs with scale and knob, before it strikes the summer foliage out in a green flame, so life, in deepening with me, deepened all the course I took, the work I did. Indeed the academic law convinced of sin. The critics cried out on the falling off, regretting the first manner. But I felt my heart's life throbbing in my verse to show it lived, it also certus incomplete, disordered with all atom in the blood, but even its very tumors, warts and winds still organized by an implying life. A lady called upon me on such a day. She had the low voice of her English dames, unused, it seems, to need rise half a note to catch attention, and their quiet mood, as if they lived too high above the earth for that to put them out in anything, so gentle, because verily so proud, so wary and afraid of hurting you, by no means that you are not really vile, but that they would not touch you with their foot to push you to your place. So self-possessed yet gracious and conciliating, it takes an effort in their presence to speak truth, you know the sort of woman, brilliant stuff, and out of nature. Ampersand quo. Lady Valdemar. Ampersand quo. She said her name quite simply, as if it meant not much indeed, but something, took my hands, and smiled as if her smile could help my case, and dropped her eyes on me and let them melt. Quo. Is this, quo? She said, quo. The musen quo. Quo. No Sibyl even, quo. I answered, quo. Since she fails to guess the cause which taxed you with this visit, madam. Quo. Quo. Good, quo. She said. Quo. I value what's sincere at once. Perhaps if I had found a literal muse, the visit might have taxed me. As it is, you wear your blue so chiefly in your eyes, my fair Aurora, in a frank good way, it comforts me entirely for your fame, as well as for the trouble of ascent to this Olympus. Quo. There, a silver laugh ran rippling through her quickened little breaths, the steep stairs somewhat justified. Quo. But still your ladyship has left me curious why you dared the risk of finding the said muse? Quo. Quo. Ah, keep me, notwithstanding, to the point, like any pedant? Is the blue in eyes as awful as in stockings after all? I wonder, that you'd have my business out before I breathe exact the epic plunge in spite of gasps. Well, naturally you think I've come here, as the lion hunters go to deserts, to secure you with a trap for exhibition in my drawing rooms on zoologic soirees. Not in the least. Roar softly at me. I am frivolous, I dare say. I have played at wild beast shows like other women of my class, but now I meet my lion simply as Androcles met his. When at his mercy. Quo. So, she bent her head, as queens may mock, then lifting up her eyelids with a real grave queenly look, which ruled and would not spare, not even herself, Quo. I think you have a cousin, Leigh. Quo. Quo. You bring a word from him. Quo. My eyes leapt up to the very height of hers. Quo. A word from him. Quo. Quo. I bring a word about him, actually. But first quo. She pressed me with her urgent eyes. Quo. You do not love him, you? Quo. Quo. You're frank at least in putting questions, madam. Quo. I replied. Quo. I love my cousin cousinly no more. Quo. Quo. I guessed as much. I'm ready to be frank in answering also, if you'll question me, or even for something less. You stand outside, you artist women, of the common sex. You share not with us, and exceed us so perhaps by what you are mulcted in, your hearts being starved to make your heads, so run the old traditions of you. I can therefore speak without the natural shame which creatures feel when speaking on their level, to their like. There's many a papist she would rather die than own to her maid she put a ribbon on to catch the indifferent eye of such a man, who yet would count adulteries on her beads at Holy Mary's shrine and never blush. Because the saints are so far off, we lose all modesty before them. Thus, today, 'tis I, love Leigh. Quo. Quo. Forbear, Quo. I cried. Quo. If here's no muse, still less is any saint, nor even a friend, that Lady Valdemar should make confessions quo. Quo. That's unkindly said. If no friend, what forbids to make a friend to join to our confession ere we have done? I love your cousin. If it seems unwise to say so, it's still foolisher were frank to feel so. My first husband left me young, and pretty enough, so please you, and rich enough, to keep my booth in Mayfair with the rest to happy issues. There are marquises would serve 7 years to call me wife, I know, and, after 7, I might consider it, for there's some comfort in a marquisate when all's said, yes, but after the 7 years. I, now, love Romney. You put up your lip, so like Leigh. So like him. Pardon me, I'm well aware I do not derogate in loving Romney Leigh. The name is good, the means are excellent, but the man, heaven help us both, I am near as mad as he, in loving such an one. Quo. She slowly swung her heavy ringlets till they touched her smile, as reasonably sorry for herself, and thus continued. Quo. Of a truth, Miss Leigh, I have not, without struggle, come to this. I took a master in the German tongue, I gambled a little, went to Paris twice. But, after all, this love. You eat of love, and do as vile a thing as if you ate of garlic which, whatever else you eat, tastes uniformly acrid, till your peach reminds you of your onion. Am I coarse? Well, love's coarse, nature's coarse. Ah, there's the rub. We fair fine ladies, who park out our lives from common sheep paths, cannot help the crows from flying over, whereas natural stills Blauseinde. Drape us perfectly in lion's velvet, we are not, for that, lay figures. Look you, we have hearts within, warm, live, improvident, indecent hearts, as ready for outrageous ends and acts as any distress sempstress of them all that Romney groans and toils for. We catch love, and other fevers, in the vulgar way. Love will not be outwitted by our wit, nor outrun by our equipages, mine persisted, spite of efforts. All my cards turned up but Romney Leigh. My German stopped at Germain Wertherism. My Paris rounds returned me from the Champs-Élysées just a ghost, and sighing like Didos. I came home uncured, convicted rather to myself of being in love. In love. That's coarse, you'll say, I'm talking garlic. Quo. Coldly I replied, Quo. Apologize for atheism, not love. For me, I do believe in love, and God. I know my cousin, Lady Valdemar I know not, yet I say as much as this, whoever loves him, let her not excuse but cleanse herself, that, loving such a man, she may not do it with such unworthy love he cannot stoop and take it. Quo. Quo. That is said austerely, like a youthful prophetess, who knits her brows across her pretty eyes to keep them back from following the grey flight of doves between the temple columns. Dear, be kinder with me. Let us two be friends. I'm a mere woman, the more weak perhaps through being so proud. You're better. As for him, he's best. Indeed he builds his goodness up so high, it topples down to the other side and makes a sort of badness. There's the worst I have to say against your cousin's best. And so be mild, Aurora, with my worst for his sake, if not mine. Quo. Quo. I own myself incredulous of confidence like this availing him or you. Quo. Quo. And I, myself, of being worthy of him with any love, in your sense I am not, so let it pass. And yet I save him if I marry him. Let that pass too. Quo. Quo. Pass, pass. We play police upon my cousin's life, to indicate what may or may not pass? Quo. I cried. Quo. He knows what's worthy of him. The choice remains with him. And what he chooses, act or wife, I think I shall not call unworthy, I, for one. Quo. Quo. 'Tis somewhat rashly said, Quo. She answered slow. Quo. Now let's talk reason, though we talk of love. Your cousin Romney Leigh's a monster. There, the words out fairly, let me prove the fact. We'll take, say, that most perfect of antiques they call the genius of the Vatican, which seems too beauteous to endure itself in this mixed world, and fasten it for once upon the torso of the dancing faun, who might limp surely, if he did not dance, instead of Buonarroti's mask. What then? We show the sort of monster Romney is, with godlike virtues and heroic aims subjoined to limping possibilities of mismade human nature. Grant the man twice godlike, twice heroic, still he limps, and here's the point we come to. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Pardon me, but, Lady Valdemar, the point's the thing we never come to. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Caustic, insolent at need. I like you and quo. There, she took my hands. Ampersand quo. And now, my lioness, help Androcles, for all your roaring. Help me. For myself I would not say so, but for him. He limps so certainly, he'll fall into the pit a week hence, so I lose him so he is lost. For when he's fairly married, he'll, to a girl of doubtful life, undoubtful birth, start out in London till her coarse-grained hands are whiter than her morals, even you may call his choice unworthy. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Married. Lost. He. Romney. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Ah, you're moved at last, ampersand quo, she said. Ampersand quo. These monsters, set out in the open sun, of course throw monstrous shadows. Those who think awry, will scarce act straightly. Who but he? And who but you can wonder? He has been mad, the whole world knows, since first, a nominal man, he soured the proctors, tried the gownsmen's wits, with equal scorn of triangles and wine, and took no honors, yet was honorable. They'll tell you he lost count of Homer's ships in Melbourne's poor bills, Ashley's factory bills, ignored the Aspasia we all dare to praise, for other women, dear, we could not name because we were decent. Well, he had some right on his side probably. Men always have who go absurdly wrong. The living burr who brews your ale exceeds in vital worth dead Cassar who stops bungholes in the cask. And also, to do good is excellent, for persons of his income, even to boors. I sympathize with all such things. But he went mad upon them. Madder and more mad from college times to these, as, going downhill, the faster still, the farther. You must know your Leigh by heart. He has sown his black young curls with bleaching cares of 500,000 men already. If you do not starve, or sin, you're nothing to him. Pay the income tax and break your heart upon single quotee, he'll scarce be touched. But come upon the parish, qualified for the parish stocks, and Romney will be there to call you brother, sister, or perhaps a tenderer name still. Had I any chance with Mr. Leigh, who am Lady Valdemar and never committed felony? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. You speak too bitterly, ampersand quo. I said, ampersand quo. For the literal truth. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. The truth is bitter. Here's a man who looks forever on the ground. You must be low, or else a pictured ceiling overhead, good painting thrown away. For me, I've done what women may were somewhat limited, we modest women, but I've done my best. How men are perjured when they swear our eyes have meaning in them. They're just blue or brown, they just can drop their lids a little. And yet mine did more, for I read half Fourier through, Proudhon, Considerant, and Louis Blanc, with various others of his socialists, and, if I had been a fathom less in love, had cured myself with gaping. As it was, I quoted from them prettily enough, perhaps, to make them sound half rational to a saner man than he whene'er we talked, for which I dodged occasion, learned by heart his speeches in the Commons and elsewhere upon the social question. heaped reports of wicked women and penitentiaries on all my tables with a place for Sue, and gave my name to swell subscription lists toward keeping up the sun at nights in heaven, and other possible ends. All things I did, except the impossible, such as wearing gowns provided by the 10 hours movement. There I stopped. We must stop somewhere. He, meanwhile unmoved as the Indian tortoise 'neath the world, let all that noise go on upon his back. He would not disconcert or throw me out. 'Twas well to see a woman of my class with such a dawn of conscience. For the heart, made firewood for his sake, and flaming up to his face, he merely warmed his feet at it, just deigned to let my carriage stop him short in Parker Street, Hill, leaning on the door with news of the committee which sat last on pickpockets at Sook. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. You jest. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. As martyrs jest, dear, if you read their lives, upon the axe which kills them. When all's done by me. For him you ask, and presently the color of my hair he cannot tell, or answers dark at random. While, be sure, he's absolute on the figure, 5 or 10, of my last subscription. Is it bearable, and I a woman? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Is it reparable, though I were a man? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. I know not. That's to prove. But, first, this shameful marriage? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. I cried. Ampersand quo. Then really there's a marriage? Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Yesterday I held him fast upon it. Mr. Leigh, said I, shut up a thing, it makes more noise. The boiling town keeps secrets ill. I've known yours since last week. Forgive my knowledge so, you feel I'm not the woman of the world thinks. You have borne with me before and used me in your noble work, our work, and now you shall not cast me off because you're at the difficult point, the join. 'Tis true, Evan, I can scarce admit the cogency of such a marriage, where you do not love except the class, yet marry and throw your name down to the gutter, for a fire escape to future generations. 'Tis sublime, a great example, a true genesis of the opening social era. But take heed, this virtuous act must have a patent weight, or loses half its virtue. Make it tell, interpret it, and set it in a light, and do not muffle it in a winter cloak as a vulgar bit of shame, as if, at best, a Leigh had made a mésalliance and blushed the Howard should know it. Then, I pressed him more, single quotate he would not choose. I said, that even his kin, or Leigh, even, should conceive his act less sacrifice, more fantasy. At which he grew so pale, dear, to the lips. I knew I had touched him. Do you know her? He inquired. My cousin Aurora? Single quote, why yes, I said, and lied. But truly we all know you by your books, and so I offered to come straight to you, explain the subject, justify the cause, and take you with me to St. Margaret's Court to see this miracle, this Marian Earl, this drover's daughter. She's not pretty, he swears, upon whose finger, exquisitely pricked by 100 needles, were to hang the tie twixt class and class in England, thus indeed by such a presence, yours and mine, to lift the match up from the doubtful place. At once he thanked me sighing, murmured to himself, she'll do it perhaps, she's noble, thanked me twice, and promised, as Mygert done, to put off his marriage for a month. Ampersand quo. I answered then. Ampersand quo. I understand your drift imperfectly. You wish to lead me to my cousin's betrothed, to touch her hand if worthy, and hold her hand if feeble, thus to justify his match. So be it then. But how this serves your ends, and how the strange confession of your love serves this, I have to learn I cannot see. Ampersand quo. She knit her restless forehead. Ampersand quo. Then, despite, Aurora, that most radiant morning name, you're dull as any London afternoon. I wanted time, and gained it, wanted you, and gain you. You will come and see the girl in whose most prodigal eyes the lineal pearl and pride of all your lofty race of Leighs is destined to solution. Authorized by sight and knowledge, then, you'll speak your mind, and prove to Romney, in your brilliant way, he'll wrong the people and posterity. Say such a thing is bad for me and you fail utterly, by concluding thus an execrable marriage. Break it up, desert it peradventure presently we'll plant a better fortune in its place. Be good to me, Aurora, scorn me less for saying the thing I should not. Well, I know I should not. I have kept, as others have, the iron rule of womanly reserve in lip and life, till now. I wept a week before I came here. Ampersand quo. Ending, she was pale. The last words, haughtily said, were tremulous. This palfrey pranced in harness, arched her neck, and, only by the foam upon the bit, you saw she champed against it. Then I rose. Ampersand quo. I love love, truth's no cleaner thing than love. I comprehend a love so fiery hot it burns its natural veil of august shame, and stands sublimely in the nude, as chaste as medicine Venus. But I know, a love that burns through veils will burn through masks and shrivel up treachery. What, love and lie? Nay, go to the opera. Your love's curable. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. A love and lie? Ampersand quo. She said, and quo. A lie, forsooth. Ampersand quo. Anne beat her taper foot upon the floor, and smiled against the shoe. Ampersand quo. You're hard, Miss Leigh, unversed in current phrases. Bowling greens of poets are fresher than the world's highways. Forgive me that I rashly blew the dust which dims our hedges even, in your eyes, and vexed you so much. You find, probably, no evil in this marriage, rather good of innocence, to pastoralize and song, you'll give the bond your signature, perhaps, beneath the lady's mark, indifferent that Romney chose a wife could write her name, in witnessing he loved her. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. Loved. Ampersand quo. I cried. Ampersand quo. Who tells you that he wants a wife to love? He gets a horse to use, not love. I think there's work for wives as well, and after straw, when men are liberal. For myself, you are supposing power in me to break this match. I could not do it to save Romney's life, and would not to save mine. Ampersand quo. Ampersand quo. You take it so? Ampersand quo. She said, Ampersand quo. Farewell then. Write your books in peace, as far as may be, for some secret stir now obvious to me, for, most obviously, in coming hither I mistook the way. Ampersand quo. Whereat she touched my hand and bent her head, and floated from me like a silent cloud that leaves the sense of thunder. I drew breath, oppressed in my deliverance. After all, this woman breaks her social system up for love, so counted the love possible to such, and lilies are still lilies, pulled by smutty hands, though spotted from their white. And thus she is better happily, of her kind, than Romney Leigh, who lives by diagrams, and crosses out the spontaneities of all his individual, personal life with formal universals. As if man were set upon a high stool at a desk to keep God's books for him in red and black, and feel by millions. What, if even God were chiefly God by living out himself to an individualism of the infinite, etern, intense, profuse, still throwing up the golden spray of multitudinous worlds in measure to the proclive weight and rush of his inner nature, the spontaneous love still proof an outflow of spontaneous life? Then live, Aurora. 2 hours afterward, within St. Margaret's Court I stood alone, close-veiled. A sick child, from an ague fit, whose wasted right hand gambled against his left with an old brass button in a blot of sun, jeered weakly at me as I passed across the uneven pavement, while a woman, rouged upon the angular cheekbones, kerchief torn, thin dangling locks, and flat lascivious mouth, cursed at a window both ways, in and out, by turns some bedrock creature and myself, quo. Lie still there, mother. Like her the dead dog you'll be tomorrow. What, we pick our way, fine madam, with those damnable small feet. We cover up our face from doing good, as if it were our purse. What brings you here, my lady? Is single quotee to find my gentleman who visits his tame pigeon in the eaves. Our cholera catch you with its cramps and spasms, and tumble up your good clothes, veil and all, and turn your whiteness dead blue. Quo. I looked up. I think I could have walked to hell that day, and never flinched. Quo. The dear Christ comfort you, quo. I said, quo. You must have been most miserable to be so cruel, quo. And I emptied out my purse upon the stones, when, as I had cast the last charm in the cauldron, the whole court went boiling, bubbling up, from all its doors and windows, with a hideous wail of laughs and roarvos, and blows perhaps. I passed too quickly for distinguishing, and pushed a little side door hanging on a hinge, and plunged into the dark, and groped and climbed the long, steep, narrow stair twixt broken rail and mildewed wall that let the plaster drop to startle me in the blackness. Still, up, so high lived Romney's bride. I paused at last before a low door in the roof, and knocked. There came an answer like a hurried dove, quo. So soon. Can that be Mr. Leigh? So soon. Quo. And, as I entered, an ineffable face met mine upon the threshold. Quo. Oh, not you, not you. Quo. The dropping of the voice implied. Quo. Then, if not you, for me not anyone. Quo. I looked her in the eyes, and held her hands, and said quo. I am his cousin, Romney Leigh's. And here I come to see my cousin too. Quo. She touched me with her face and with her voice, this daughter of the people. Such soft flowers from such rough roots. The people, under there, can't sin so, curse so, look so, smell so. Yet have such daughters. Nowise beautiful was Marian Earl. She was not white nor brown, but could look either, like a mist that changed according to being shown on more or less. The hair, too, ran its opulence of curls and doubt twixt dark and bright, nor left she clear to name the color. Too much hair perhaps, I'll name a fault here for so small a head, which seemed to droop on that side and on this, as a full-blown rose uneasy with its weight though not a went should trouble it. Again, the dimple in the cheek had better gone with redder, fuller rounds. And somewhat large the mouth was, though the milky little teeth dissolved it to so infantine a smile. For soon it smiled at me. The eyes smiled too, but 'twas as if remembering they had wept, and knowing they should, some day, weep again. We talked. She told me all her story out, which I'll retell with fuller utterance, as colored and confirmed in after times by others and herself too. Marian Earl was born upon the ledge of Malvern Hill, to eastward, in a hut built up at night, to evade the landlord's eye, of mud and turf, still liable, if once he looked that way, to being straight leveled, scattered by his foot, like any other ant hill. Born, I say. God sent her to his world, commissioned right, her human testimonials fully signed, not scant and soul complete in lineaments. But others had to swindle her a place to wail in when she had come. No place for her, by man's law. Born an outlaw was this babe. Her first cry in our strange and strangling air, when cast in spasms out by the shuddering womb, was wrong against the social code, forced wrong. What business had the baby to cry there? I tell her story and grow passionate. She, Marian, did not tell it so, but used meek words that made no wonder of herself for being so sad a creature. Quo. Mr. Leigh quo. Consider truly that such things should change. Quo. They will, in heaven, but meantime, on the earth, quo. There's none can like a nettle as a pink, quo. Except himself. We're nettles, some of us, quo. Give offense by the act of springing up, quo. And, if we leave the damp side of the wall, quo. The hose, of course, are on us, quo. So she said. Her father earned his life by random jobs despised by steadier workmen, keeping swine on commons, picking hops, or hurrying on the harvest at wet seasons, or, at need, assisting the Welsh drovers, when a drove of startled horses plunged into the mist below the mountain road, and sowed the wind with wandering neighings. In between the gaps of such irregular work he drank and slept, and cursed his wife because, the pence being out, she could not buy more drink. At which she turned the worm, and beat her baby in revenge for her own broken heart. There's not a crime but takes its proper change out still in crime. If once rung on the counter of this world, let sinners look to it. Yet the outcast child, for whom the very mother's face forewent the mother's special patience, lived and grew. Learn early to cry low, and walk alone, with that pathetic vacillating roll of the infant body on the uncertain feet, the earth being felt unstable ground so soon, at which most women's arms unclose at once with irrepressive instinct. Thus, at 3, this poor weaned kid would run off from the fold, this babe would steal off from the mother's chair, and, creeping through the golden walls of Gowers, would find some keyhole toward the secrecy of heaven's high blue, and, nestling down, peer out, oh, not to catch the angels at their games, she had never heard of angels, but to gaze she knew not why, to see she knew not what, a hungering outward from the barren earth for something like a joy. She liked, she said, to dazzle black her sight against the sky, for then, it seemed, some grand blind love came down, and groped her out, and clasped her with a kiss. She learnt God at way, and was beat for it whenever she went home, yet came again, as surely as the trapped hare, getting free, returns to his form. This grand blind love, she said, this skyey father and mother both in one, instructed her and civilized her more than even Sunday school did afterward, to which a lady sent her to learn books and sit upon a long bench in a row with other children. Well, she laughed sometimes to see them laugh and maul their texts. But after she was sorrowful with noise and wondered if their mothers beat them hard at ever they should laugh so. There was one she loved indeed, Rosebell, a 7 years child, so pretty and clever, who read syllables when Marian was at letters. She would laugh at nothing. Hold your finger up, she laughed, then shook her curls down over eyes and mouth to hide her make mirth from the schoolmaster, and Rose's pelting glee, as frank as rain on cherry blossoms, brightened Marian too, to see another Mary whom she loved. She whispered once, the children side by side, with mutual arms entwined about their necks. Quo. Your mother lets you laugh so? Quo. 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 Said Rose. Quo. She lets me. She was dug into the ground 6 years since, I being but a yearling wean. Such mothers let us play and lose our time, and never scold nor beat us. Don't you wish you had one like that? Quo. There, Marian breaking off looked suddenly in my face. Quo. Poor Rose, Quo. Said she, Quo. I heard her laugh last night in Oxford Street. I'd pour out half my blood to stop that laugh. Poor Rose, poor Rose. Ampersand quo, said Marian. She resumed. It tried her, when she had learnt at Sunday school what God was, what he wanted from us all, and how in choosing sin we vexed the Christ, to go straight home and hear her father pull the name down on us from the thunder shelf, then drink away his soul into the dark from seeing judgment. Father, mother, home, for God and heaven reversed to her, the more she knew of right, the more she guessed their wrong. Her price paid down for knowledge, was to know the vileness of her kindred, through her heart, her filial and tormented heart. Henceforth, they struck their blows at virtue. Oh, 'tis hard to learn you have a Father up in heaven by a gathering certain sense of being, on earth, still worse than orphaned. 'Tis too heavy a grief, the having to thank God for such a joy. And so passed Marian's life from year to year. Her parents took her with them when they tramped, dodged lanes and heaths, frequented towns and fairs, and once went farther and saw Manchester, and once the sea, that blue end of the world, that fair scroll finis of a wicked book, and twice a prison, back at intervals, returning to the hills. Hills draw like heaven, and stronger sometimes, holding out their hands to pull you from the vile flats up to them. And though perhaps these strollers still strolled back, as sheep do, simply that they knew the way, they certainly felt better than aware emerging from the social smut of towns to wipe their feet clean on the mountain turf. In which long wanderings, Marian lived and learned, endured and learned. The people on the roads would stop and ask her why her eyes outgrew her cheeks, and if she meant to lodge the birds and all that hair. And then they lifted her, the miller in his cart, a mile or twain, the butcher's boy on horseback. Often too the peddler stopped, and tapped her on the head with absolute forefinger, brown and ringed, and asked if peradventure she could read, and when she answered and quo, ampersand quo, would toss her down some stray odd volume from his heavy pack, a Thomson's Seasons, mulcted of the spring, or half a play of Shakespeare's, torn across. She had to guess the bottom of a page by just the top sometimes, as difficult, as, sitting on the moon, to guess the earth. Or else a sheaf of leaves for that small Ruth's small gleanings torn out from the heart of books, from Churchyard Elegies and Eden's Lost, from Burns, and Bunyan, Selkirk, and Tom Jones. 'Twas somewhat hard to keep the things distinct, and oft the jangling influence jarred the child like looking at a sunset full of grace through a pothouse window while the drunken nose went on behind her. But she weeded out her book leaves, threw away the leaves that hurt, first tore them small, that none should find a word, and made a nosegay of the sweet and good to fold within her breast, and pour upon at broken moments of the noontide glare, when leave was given her to untie her cloak and rest upon the dusty highway's bank from the road's dust, or oft, the journey done, some city friend would lead her by the hand to hear a lecture at an institute. And thus she had grown, this Marian Earl of ours, to know book learning. She was ignorant of authors, not in earshot of the things outspoken o'er the heads of common men by men who are uncommon, but within the cadenced hum of such, and capable of catching from the fringes of the wing some fragmentary phrases, here and there, of that fine music, which, being carried into her soul, had reproduced itself afresh in finer motions of the lips and lids. She said, in speaking of it, ampersand quo, if a flower were thrown you out of heaven at intervals, you'd soon attain to a trick of looking up, and so with her. Ampersand quo. She counted me her years, till I felt old. And then she counted me her sorrowful pleasures, till I felt ashamed. She told me she was fortunate and calm on such and such a season, sat and sewed, with no one to break up her crystal thoughts, while rhymes from lovely poems span around their ringing circles of ecstatic tune, beneath the moistened finger of the hour. Her parents called her a strange, sickly child, not good for much, and given to sulk and stare, and smile into the hedges and the clouds, and tremble if one shook her from her foot by any blow, or word even. Outdoor jobs went ill with her, and household quiet work she was not born to. Had I kept the North, they might have had their pennyworth out of her, like other parents. In the factories your children work for you, not you for them, or else they better had been choked with ere the first breath drawn. But, in this tramping life, was nothing to be done with such a child but tramp and tramp. And yet she knitted hose not ill, and was not dull at needlework. And all the country people gave her pence for darning stockings past their natural age, and patching petticoats from old to new, and other light work done for thrifty wives. One day, said Marian, the sun shone that day. Her mother had been badly beat, and felt the bruises sore about her wretched soul. That must have been. She came in suddenly, and snatching in a sort of breathless rage her daughter's headgear comb, let down the hair upon her like a sudden waterfall, then drew her drenched and passive by the arm outside the hut they lived in. When the child could clear her blinded face from all that stream of tresses, there, a man stood, with beast's eyes that seemed as they would swallow her life complete in body and spirit, hair and all, and burning stertorous breath that hurt her cheek. He breathed so near. The mother held her tight, saying hard between her teeth and quo, why wench, the squire speaks to you now. The squire's too good, he means to set you up, and comfort us. Be mannerly at least. Quo. The child turned round and looked up piteous in the mother's face. Be sure that mother's deathbed will not want another devil to damn, than such a look. Quo. Oh, mother. Quo. Then, with desperate glance to heaven, Quo. God, free me from my mother. Quo. She shrieked out. Quo. These mothers are too dreadful. Quo. And, with force as passionate as fear, she tore her hands, like lilies from the rocks, from hers and his, and sprang down, bounded headlong down the steep, away from both, away, if possible, as far as God, away. They yelled at her, as famished hounds at a hare. She heard them yell. She felt her name hiss after her from the hills, like shot from guns. On. And now she had cast the voices off with the uplands. On. Mad fear was running in her feet and killing the ground. The white roads curled as if she burnt them up, the green fields melted, wayside trees fell back to make room for her. Then her heart grew vexed. Trees, fields, turned on her and ran after her. She heard the quick pants of the hills behind, their keen air pricked her neck. She had lost her feet, could run no more, yet somehow went as fast. The horizon red twixt steeples in the east so sucked her forward, while her heart kept swelling, till it swelled so big it seemed to fill her body, when it burst and overflowed the world and swamped the light. Quo. And now I am dead and safe. Quo. Thought Marian Earl. She had dropped, she had fainted. As the sense returned, the night had passed, not life's night. She was aware of heavy tumbling motions, creaking wheels, the driver shouting to the lazy team that swung their rankling bells against her brain, while, through the wagon's coverture and chinks, the cruel yellow morning pecked at her alive or dead upon the straw inside, at which her soul ached back into the darkened parade. Quo. No more of that. Quo. A wagoner had found her in a ditch beneath the moon, as white as moonshine save for the oozing blood. At first he thought her dead. But when he had wiped the mouth and heard its eye, he raised her up, and laid her in his wagon in the straw, and so conveyed her to the distant town to which his business called himself, and left the heap of misery at the hospital. She stirred. The place seemed new and strange as death. The white straight bed, with others straight and white, like graves dug side by side at measured lengths, and quiet people walking in and out with wonderful low voices and soft steps and apparitional equal care for each, astonished her with order, silence, law. And when a gentle hand held out a cup, she took it, as you do at sacrament, half awed, half melted, not being used, indeed, to so much love as makes the form of love and courtesy of manners. Delicate drinks and rare white bread, to which some dying eyes were turned in observation. Oh my God, how sick we must be, ere we make men just. I think it frets the saints in heaven, to see how many desolate creatures on the earth have learned the simple dues of fellowship and social comfort, in a hospital, as Marian did. She lay there, stunned, half-tranced, and wished, at intervals of growing sense, she might be sicker yet, if sickness made the world so marvelous kind, the air so hushed, and all her wake time quiet as asleep. For now she understood, as such things were, how sickness ended very often heaven among the unspoken raptures, yet more sick, and surelier happy. Then she dropped her lids, and, folding up her hands as flowers at night, would lose no moment of the blessed time. She lay enseethed in fever many weeks, but youth was strong and overcame the test. Revolted soul and flesh were reconciled and fetched back to the necessary day and daylight duties. She could creep about the long bare rooms, and stare out drearily from any near window on the street, till someone who had nursed her as a friend said coldly to her, as an enemy, quo. She had leave to go next week, being well enough, quo. While only her heart ached, quo. Go next week, quo. Thought she, quo. Next week. How would it be with her next week, let out into that terrible street alone among the pushing people? To go. Where? Quo. One day, the last before the dreaded last, among the convalescents, like herself prepared to go next morning, she sat dumb, and heard half absently the women talk, how one was famished for her baby's cheeks, quo. The little wretch would know her. A year old and lively, like his father. Quo. One was keen to get to work, and fill some clamorous mouths. And one was tender for her dear Goodman who had missed her sorely, and one, querulous, quo. Would pay backbiting neighbors who had dared to talk about her as already dead, quo. And one was proud, quo. And if her sweetheart Luke had left her for a ruddier face than hers, the gossip would be seen through at a glance. Sweet riddance of such sweethearts, let him hang. 'Twere good to have been sick for such an end. Quo. And while they talked, and Marian felt the worse for having missed the worst of all their wrongs, a visitor was ushered through the wards and paused among the talkers. Quo. When he looked it was as if he spoke, and when he spoke he sang perhaps, quo. Said Marian. Quo. Could she tell? She only knew quo. So much she had chronicled, as Sir Afs might the making of the sun, quo. That he who came and spake was Ronnie Leigh, and then and there she saw and heard him first, quo. And when it was her turn to have the face upon her, all those buzzing pallid lips being satisfied with comfort, when he changed to Marian, saying quo. And you? You're going, where? Quo. She, moveless as a worm beneath a stone which someone's stumbling foot has spurned aside, writhed suddenly, astonished with the light, and, breaking into sobs, cried quo. Where I go? None asked me till this moment. Can I say where I go, when it has not seemed worthwhile to God himself, who thinks of everyone, to think of me and fix where I shall go? Quo. Quo. So young, quo. He gently asked her, quo. You have lost your father and your mother? ampersand quo, ampersand quo, both, ampersand quo, she said, ampersand quo, both lost. My father was burnt up with gin or ever I sucked milk, and so is lost. My mother sold me to a man last month, and so my mother's lost, 'tis manifest. And I, who fled from her for miles and miles, as if I had caught sight of the fire of hell through some wild gap. She was my mother, sir, it seems I shall be lost too, presently, and so we end, all three of us. Ampersand quo, ampersand quo, poor child, ampersand quo, he said, with such a pity in his voice, it soothed her more than her own tears, ampersand quo, poor child. 'Tis simple that betrayal by mother's love should bring despair of God's too. Yet be taught, he's better to us than many mothers are, and children cannot wander beyond reach of the sweep of his white raiment. Touch and hold. And if you weep still, weep where John was laid while Jesus loved him. Ampersand quo, ampersand quo. She could say the words, ampersand quo. She told me, ampersand quo, exactly as he uttered them a year back, since in any doubt or dark they came out like the stars, and shone on her with just their comfort. Common words, perhaps. The ministers in church might say the same. But he made the church with what he spoke, the difference was the miracle, ampersand quo, said she. Then catching up her smile to ravishment, she added quickly, ampersand quo. I repeat his words, but not his tones. Can anyone repeat the music of an organ, out of church? And when he said poor child, I shut my eyes to feel how tenderly his voice broke through, as the ointment box broke on the holy feet to let out the rich medicative nard. Ampersand quo. She told me how he had raised and rescued her with reverent pity, as, in touching grief, he touched the wounds of Christ, and made her feel more self-respecting. Hope he called belief in God, work, worship, therefore let us pray. And thus, to snatch her soul from atheism, and keep it stainless from her mother's face, he sent her to a famous seamstress house far off in London, there to work and hope. With that, they parted. She kept sight of heaven, but not of Ronnie. He had good to do to others, through the days and through the nights she sewed and sewed and sewed. She drooped sometimes, and wondered, while along the tawny light she struck the new thread into her needle's eye, how people without mothers on the hills could choose the town to live in. Then she drew the stitch, and mused how Ronnie's face would look, and if 'twere likely he'd remember hers when they two had their meeting after death.